Hello, everybody. My name is Anika Bukapatnam, and we're back with episode 8 of 15 Questions with the Feminist. Question number 1. What is your name and what is your role in the menstrual movement?
Hello. So my name is Gabriela Lopez-Castillo. When I have to think about my role in the menstrual movement, I primarily started out just learning and becoming more educated in this space. I started becoming more involved in it. As soon as the pandemic started in 2020, I was asked to think about, I had come across randomly some of the educational initiatives that the nonprofit period was hosting when the pandemic started. And I kind of just, I was so curious about it and I started going on a little bit of a deep dive in it. And since then, I slowly grew through my working period and through my own personal work in my community. So a lot of my work when it comes to menstrual equity mostly revolves around service. I work with a lot of local nonprofits and community centers and community pantries to ensure that we're raising menstrual products and distributing them to anybody who needs anywhere in New York City.
Okay, perfect. And um, I know you answered this a little, but would you be able to go into a little more depth about the first incident that allowed you to get involved in this space?
Absolutely. So I had initially been living in London at the time when the pandemic started. And when I was working there, I was working for the State Department specifically for their public affairs unit. And so a lot of the work that they had done there was primarily in relationships with communities that revolved a lot around nonprofit work and service. So when the pandemic started, I wasn't able to continue my internship. So I was looking for different ways to try to get involved with the communities around me. And just somehow, when I was looking into that, I started looking into the NHS and volunteering and looking into different health initiatives. And through my little online search came the subject of period poverty and the work that was being done in London and in the NHS. That rabbit hole led me to finding Period, which was based in the US. And so when I encountered Period, I started going through their social media and looking at their Instagram and DMing people that work there. And I just started to receive a plethora of information and knowledge about people who worked in menstrual equity, who were tackling period poverty all over the country. And it just became a little bit of a snowball effect. I found myself wrapped up in this issue that seemed so obvious to me, but I had never seen it being addressed in my life before. So it was very much an eye opener. And I was almost excited and enthralled to be in a space where it felt like I could be a part of a tangible change. And it was thrilling and motivating in so many different ways. And I it's been about 2.5 years now. So it's been wonderful to continue doing this work alongside people who are amazing at it.
Yeah, that's great. And I completely understand and connect with that feeling. And so to that extent, what has been the biggest challenge you've faced so far?
I definitely think that so ever since I started to become a lot more to take on a bit of a more of a leadership role in period poverty. I hadn't been familiarized with period poverty when I was in high school, so I never had the chance to join a chapter. And so the resources for me, especially in my community and where I live in Brooklyn, were a little bit smaller in comparison to my peers in the space. So I didn't have a team or I didn't necessarily have a chapter to join. So a lot of the work that I was doing was on my own. So it's been something that has forced me to be creative, to have a lot more of ingenuity when it came to starting my own period drives, reaching out to people, building those connections and finding ways to bring about menstrual equity and attack period poverty in my own backyard by myself. But one thing that I've learned is that you don't have to do everything by yourself. And as I continue to grow in this space, post post period and post my work there, it's been really gratifying to know that there are a lot of people that are more than willing to help, more than willing to step up and volunteer. And that's been a great learning experience for me. As definitely somebody who was always like, you know what, I can do it on my own. I got this. I can do it. And then you're drowning and you realize, okay, I need help. And it's been wonderful to unlearn that and to encounter people who are willing to help and to see that it's always going to be a team effort because we're not going to be able to tackle this by ourselves.
That's a really great moral to take away. And like from a more bird's eye point of view, do you think there's like a big or the most specific large problem hindering menstrual equity? Like what's the biggest problem facing the entire space?
I think something that I remember when I first started working in the Youth Advisory Council in Period, a lot of times when we would do different interviews or talk to our people outside of the space, when I started talking about period poverty in my own personal communities, it was I it was always education and stigma, I think, that were the consistent problems that I encountered. Whether it was just people saying, I didn't know this was an issue, whether it was people coming in my DMs and saying, is this even appropriate to talk about? Tackling those stigmas and ensuring that there's widespread education of the normalization of periods and of period poverty throughout our communities is one of the most important steps to ensure we can tackle it in a much more long-term manner on the legislative floor, in companies, in stores, in legal areas. It's that first step of attacking those stigmas and ensuring that everybody has that equal access to education about period poverty. I think that makes the biggest difference, the biggest immediate difference.
That's great. And now I'll just shift the conversation to a bit more
Sure.
um, specific questions about the work you have been doing. And so the first thing I'll ask you is, how is social justice an intersectional effort?
From my experience, learning, growing in the activism space and learning about intersectional justice, I've I've always learned from my peers about the fact that all forms of inequality are mutual reinforcing. And so we have to be analyzing them and addressing them simultaneously to prevent one form of inequality from reinforcing another. So I think it's the constant, if there's, to put it in a more casual sense, I guess it's constantly like checking yourself and constantly checking your peers, trying to just be aware of the world around you and see that in real time because it's very easy to turn a blind eye. It's very easy to let ignorance take root. And so you do have to constantly hold yourself accountable. I don't think there's much of an excuse anymore. We're exposed to so much. There's too many people that we can talk to. There's too many resources available for us not to constantly check ourselves and to ensure that we're promoting intersectionality and equity among our peers and in our communities. So that's something that I'm learning every day and that I'm hoping to promote within my life and within my peers and to continue to grow within myself.
Definitely. And I know New York was extremely like hard hit by the pandemic, and I don't want to make it seem as if like the pandemic's over, but we're definitely like not on that extreme sense of lockdown anymore. But you still see some of that fallout. So how is the COVID pandemic still exacerbating period poverty?
Some of the biggest difficulties I've experienced, or some of the biggest issues coming with period poverty as we still navigate this pandemic, is in terms of access, and especially in houseless communities and people that are experiencing housing instability. One of the instances that I can remember off the top of my head is when we had to deliver products or we had to get products out to people in women's shelters or people that are living out on the streets and people that are houseless out on the streets of New York City. It's to ensure that we are giving them access to these to menstrual products, while at the same time ensuring that we're placing their health as the priority. And so, for a lot of people, even though as the pandemic seems to be lessening, we still have to be able to navigate more vulnerable communities while ensuring that their health remains at the front, at the priority of it. So it's always just navigating that and ensuring that we're we have to reach out more. We have to go out of our way to ensure that access is equitable for all communities. And so that's been a little bit tougher, but it's something that's very much necessary.
I see what you're saying, and I can definitely see that there's like a lot of that same reluctance and hesitance to ask for help, but also like how am I going to receive it? And it's great that we can work to combat some of that. So again, how are cycles of poverty really hurting some of these communities? And to that extent, how can we help people escape them?
A lot of it, what I've been learning a lot here in city government about cycles of poverty and how they are trapping communities. It was actually really interesting. I was thinking we were speaking about that today, in which we were encountering a few. Um, we were having a really interesting discussion about how some communities will have access to some of the best resources to give them a leg up, especially when it comes to in schools in New York City. And I remember one of my peers had touched upon the fact that in lower income communities and in schools that are not receiving as much funding as others, having access to better resources is viewed as a luxury, while in other schools it's commonplace and it's normal. And it became a discussion about the fact that so many leaders in in the government sectors or in positions of authority and power, while they are in positions that can allow them to make a tangible difference in communities that are trapped in poverty, there's a failure to take responsibility or to take into account the fact that resources must be equitably distributed for everyone. It shouldn't be normalized in one community and in one school versus another. And that goes for so many different parts of society. I think that there's almost this kind of like hatred for people that are trapped in cycles of poverty where if you can relate, where you'll see a lot of this kind of toxic discourse where they say, oh, well, if you're poor, you have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just make your own way. You have to work hard. You have to find your way to break out of that. And it's very easy to say when you come from positions where it's normalized to have great resources that can push you to the top. And so I think something that constantly is trapping people in a cycle of poverty is that when there is outside help available, this outside help and people in positions of authority are not taking the responsibility to change that narrative to ensure that resources are distributed for everyone who needs them, regardless of what position you're in, regardless if you've been trapped in the cycle of poverty for decades. It's not fair to look at that and to judge someone based off of that and to think that they have to break out of that on their own. And so I think that that mindset is shared by a lot more people in authority than one would think. And because of that, that has these real world ramifications. And so that's something that I've been learning a lot when I've encountered people in the space and in the government space and in the nonprofit space, tackling those mindsets and ensuring that if you are in a position of power to help bring resources to those who need them, you have to you have to tackle those mindsets that say it should be normal for everyone, regardless of regardless of the income that you're in, that you're receiving, regardless of the position that you're in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how has your identity shaped this interest in your work in the space?
I think that my personal journey has shaped a lot of my interest in it. I'm no stranger to being, I grew up in East New York for the majority of my youth and adolescence, and I don't come from money. I don't come from a place where a lot of what my peers would view as normal, I would view as a luxury. And as a result of that, I know firsthand what it's like to be touched by the power of nonprofits or people that think that I should be able to have access to these things simply because I should have them. Wasn't about whether I studied hard enough and that's why I deserved it, or whether I was pulling myself up by my bootstraps. It was simply because I was a human being and a person who needed a certain resource and it was available for me for the taking. And so being touched by the power of nonprofits and by institutions that were willing to help people in my situations stuck with me. And I always wanted to be able to pay that forward and to return that favor to anyone and everyone in the communities that I serve in the future.
That's really great to hear. And
Thank you.
what has been the greatest tool or the greatest asset that you have had by your side as you've completed some of this work?
One of my biggest tools has been, it might sound, I guess, a little bit corny, but the ability to empathize and the ability to have a vision. I think that maintaining a strong sense of empathy for your fellow persons in your communities is essential to be able to approach this kind of work, any kind of service work, with a clear heart and a clear mind. Because at the end of the day, you are serving people, you are in service of them. And it's very, and sometimes it is a bit of thankless work. It can be. And so to be able to operate from that standpoint, to know that you are doing this because of a high sense of altruism, because of a high sense of compassion and empathy for your fellow person, to say that everyone deserves equitable treatment, equitable access to the resources that just give you a better quality, that give you, that should give you the standard of life. It's not, it shouldn't be a luxury to have access to period products. It shouldn't be a luxury to have access to certain foods. It shouldn't be a luxury to be able to have access to certain things in your schools, to be able to have access to laptops, or other things that are the norm in so many other places, for so many other communities and so many other families and people. So operating from a very empathetic and compassionate point and maintaining that throughout your work has been something that keeps me going and keeps me motivated, regardless of the difficulties of it. And I think the second one has just been maintaining a clear vision. You, like I said before, it can be thankless work, and it's easy to get to lose the motivation in this kind of work, in service especially. But to maintain a vision of the kind of world that you want to create and the kind of world that you want to be a part of has been something that pushes me forward and pushes my peers forward, because at the end of the day, we're working to build a better world, if not for us, then for the generations that come after us, for people to have the things that we may not have been able to. And that's what I want to continue to build up within myself, to maintain that strong vision for the future.
Wow. And can I ask what role, as you've mentioned, you've used creativity to help achieve or bring some of these goals to fruition. So what role has it played? Do you have any examples of creativity that you can recollect?
Okay. When I was first starting to run my period drives, actually, when I my first one I did by myself, and so I just had it in my mind. I wanted to run a period drive. I really want to do one. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna find a way. And I found that a lot of times when you're doing something for the first time, or when you're pitching a project or developing a project for the first time, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats and to be a jack of all trades. So it's a little, I'm not going to say it was silly, but I was very, very proud of myself for the fact that I'm not necessarily an arts oriented person. I'm not in marketing. I'm not really amazing at putting together, Canva is not my best friend yet. But I was very proud of the fact that when I wanted to start creating flyers and wanted to start creating promotional materials and ways, to have these online resources for people to access, to check out the period drive, to check out the Amazon wish list and such, was very proud of myself to be able to tackle those skills that I didn't really possess. And so I was putting together flyers and getting all the images together and putting together the Amazon wish list and getting like a little booklet to talk about period poverty and a little summary and snapshots of them. They I know it might seem as if it's not very, like, it doesn't seem like it's all that, but for me personally, it was such a proud moment, because I was tackling skills and tackling areas of this kind of work that aren't thought of off firsthand. And I had to be creative, I had to be ingenuitive to be able to bring that vision of it to life, at least on the screens. And so it was something I was very proud of myself. I remember printing out the period drive flyer, and I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, it looks so great. I made that, like, that came to reality. I was like, Canva's amazing. And it was those little moments that made me so excited, just because I was like, okay, I have the passion for this. I have the drive. I want to do this. I want to work in the menstrual equity space. I want to tackle period poverty in my small ways. And those are like the little moments. Those are the moments of reality where I'm like, okay, if I can do that, if I can make that flyer, then everything else will just come easily. some moments of creativity like that help me so much. And I'm learning so much about it every day. It's a little silly, I guess, but I was very proud of it.
That's great.
Thanks.
Um, so how can young people get involved with menstrual activism in their communities?
I think that one of the amazing things about the menstrual equity is that it's gaining traction all over the world and it's being tackled in so many different countries and on the legislative floor in so many different governments. Ireland has recently passed legislation to provide free period products for the entirety of the country. And so period poverty and menstrual equity is being addressed and is being talked about all over the globe. And as a result, there are so many different organizations, small grassroots community groups, or large nonprofits that have international or national acclaim and recognition. There is no such thing as starting too small. There's no such thing as starting off too high. You are able to find one organization in anywhere you are. And if you can't find one near you, you can find one online and use those resources to at the very least start getting involved, to start gaining more of an education for it. I mean, I will toot my own horn, so to speak, but as a former youth advisory council member, period is a great place to start if you're in the US. But there are so many amazing menstrual equity organizations that you can look into wherever you are to just at the very least reach out, ask what kind of events are you doing? Do you have chapters? Do you have smaller organizations that you partner with? You can look at service providers, even smaller community food pantries and community fridges. If you're in New York, there's a community fridge called Phoenix in Queens that serves thousands of their community members within the Astoria and Long Island City areas. And they're able to not only give out period products, but they're able to give out food, toys. There's so many nonprofits and so many people on the ground doing this work that the opportunities are endless. And so the ability and the measure of your impact is also endless. You can start from anywhere and you can go as far as you want in the menstrual equity space.
And our last four questions are kind of these rapid fire things that we do just to get to know our guest each episode. And so, question number 12 is, what is something you wish you knew about menstruation growing up?
And it's not embarrassing. I got, I mean, and there's no such thing as TMI. Oh my gosh, because I literally was just about to say, oh, not to have too much, not to see TMI. But I got my period when I was 12 years old in an Outback for the first time. I was in the Outback bathroom and I was like, what the heck is this? I'm dying. And I refused to talk about it with my mother until I was, I think, 16. I didn't like talking about my periods. I don't know why I had developed this awkwardness about it. And even when my mom would try to like talk to me about it, I'd be like, no, 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 it's fine. I don't want to talk about it. I had nobody normalizing it. I had nobody talking about it casually, nobody approaching it with a smile saying, yeah, periods are normal. So, like, it's a period. Okay. Next, it's a part of your body. Next. And I had nobody ensuring that, no one reassuring that to me. There was no media reassuring that to me. There wasn't that. And so definitely the normalization of periods is something that I really wished I had, and doing so in a positive manner. Because I think it's one thing to learn about periods in your health classes in high school, and it's another thing to have people normalize it, your peers normalize it, people your age, menstruators all over the world normalizing it. It's a lot more different now than I think what we remember when we were younger, for sure.
Yeah. What does the word stigma mean to you?
I think the word stigma means to me, it's almost that inadvertent reaction that you have to a certain matter or subject that you're not even realizing, is the stigma almost. It's that quick reaction. Like when I first got my period and my mom would try to talk to me about it, it was that quick, I don't want to talk about it. It's these little stigmas that you don't even realize are embedded within you because of all these societal factors and influences, whether it's from media, your peers, little things and little influences build up as we grow and as we are influenced in our society, that when they will manifest and flourish in ways that you didn't even realize. So it's kind of that almost gut instinct when you come across certain subjects, when someone comes across something that they had been that they had been led to believe is true, stereotypes that you encounter that you grow up to believe in wholeheartedly, that gut reaction to issues and matters. I think that's something that's where stigma manifests itself very obviously.
Yeah. Do you have any particularly interesting or entertaining, amusing life stories from this journey?
From my journey in period poverty, what are some of the most interesting things I have learned? I think that there is nothing like being able to enter a room or to start a conversation with somebody, and the first thing that's out of your mouth was when they ask, "Oh, what are some of the interests that you're passionate about, or what is something that you're working on?" And for the first thing out of your mouth to be, "Oh, menstruation, like menstrual equity, period poverty." There is this kind of funny, it's like clockwork, but there's something great about meeting someone and having those be the first words out of your mouth and then seeing the reaction. It's either the eyes wide open, the look to the side because they suddenly feel awkward. The amount of times that I have encountered that over the last 2 years has been, if I had a nickel for every time somebody felt awkward about me talking about menstrual equity. So it's something that has definitely built up my confidence because I used to be shy. When someone would feel awkward about it, I was like, oh man, I shouldn't talk about this. Then I was like, why? Why? Why am I shy? Why am I not? Why am I going to shy away from something that is important, that matters? And literally, me shying away from it is just reinforcing the stigmas and reinforcing the base issue of the fact that we are looking at periods as if they are ugly, as if they are gross, as if they are something that should be hidden away from. And that in itself is just an incredibly sexist way of living with menstruation. And so if I can continue going into conversations and saying, hi, let's talk about periods. And if I can do that, and especially in rooms of people that would not welcome that normally, if we can continue with that kind of way of living, I think that there is going to be great progress made much faster than we think.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing more powerful than awkward men. Um,
Literally. It's very gratifying, honestly.
Definitely.
You're
Um,
just
Finally, our 15th question. What are your words of wisdom?
I feel like sometimes I feel like, oh man, I'm not in a position to give words of wisdom. I don't know anything. Um, but I think that if a word of wisdom to leave all judgment and naivete at the door. In this kind of work, I think that it's very important to open your heart and to open your mind to anything that can come your way, to any person that comes your way. When we spoke about, when we touched upon seeing stigmas in everyday life and how that gut reaction, those you may not realize the length to which stigmas and stereotypes and thoughts about other people could be embedded in you. You can't help the environment that you're born into. You can't help the people that are around you for a good majority of your life. And so those influences do have a way of sneaking themselves into you. So entering in any kind of activism work in any, and especially in menstrual equity, um, in the race and the fight for equality in all sectors, to leave judgment and leave naivete at the door. The world isn't perfect. There are going to be people that are going to fight against what you believe in, and you can't be naive to that. But you have to leave judgment at the door. And so that's something that I've tried to emphasize a lot with my peers when I'm trying to teach them a little bit more about menstrual equity. Leave that judgment out the door, leave that awkwardness at the door. Just come in with an open mind and an open heart to learn from all of your peers. And as a result, you'll be able to tackle this work with compassion, with vision, and with the power to build a better future.
That's great.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
And that kind of wraps it up. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. We really enjoyed hearing from you.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed speaking with you too. To making men more awkward in topics of menstrual equity in the years to come.
Yes.